Today, as you know, is the fourth Sunday of Advent. Thank God that the Advent season is an extended period of time. We have 4 weeks to prepare for the great celebration. And many churches, including ours here and mine at the White House, we spend these 4 weeks in thinking about and meditating on 4 themes. Year after year, we come back to this season of Advent and we visit these themes. As you know very well, the first theme that we consider in this Advent season is hope. We light the candle of hope. The second week, we come together and we light the candle of peace. The third week, we come together and we light the candle of joy. And today, as we were all part of that candle lighting that went on in the beginning of the service, we come to light the fourth and the final candle on the Advent wreath, which is love. These 4 themes, in essence, really is what Christmas is all about. Hope, because you know that back in the days of the prophet Isaiah, and we read this passage every time around this time of the year. Isaiah chapter 9, where he very clearly proclaims that a day is coming, a day of redemption, a day when the Lord will deliver his people from their bondage, from their slavery, from their status of being exiles in Babylon. They had cried to God, even as they had cried earlier in their history when they were slaves in Egypt. Much in the same way, they cried to God and said, God, will you not hear our cry? Will you not redeem us? How are we going to sing the Lord's song in a strange and foreign land? They cried out. And God sends the prophet Isaiah, and he very clearly says, the day is coming when the Lord will hear your cry and your prayer and will bring you back to the land. The land that God gave to your ancestor Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And that promise is fulfilled. Of course, the people are brought back to the land of Israel, the Palestine, and they're given a place, a home. They begin to rebuild the walls, as you know from Ezra. Nehemiah, they begin to rebuild the walls of the temple, and they struggle and they strive to bring it back to what it was. And the history continues in this nation's path, and eventually they end up as again somewhat like slaves under the Roman Empire. They're still not free. They're still not who they thought that God had called them to be. There was still that deep yearning to be independent of the oppression of the Romans, and they wanted again a country, a nation that it was under David and Solomon, and so they remembered that. So there was this eager waiting for a redeemer, not just from bringing them from a foreign land back to the land of Israel, but they wanted a true freedom. So once again, their yearnings went up as cries to God, and the answer to their cry came in the form of the birth of the Messiah. For years, they waited for this Jesus Messiah to bring about a radical change in the way they were living. Their hope was that he would bring about that same kind of a kingdom that they had known in their history back in those days, when the kingdom was united. But it didn't happen. They were disappointed. Many of us have our own designs. We have our own plans. We have our own expectations of what God must do. Just as much as the people of Israel didn't want to hear what the Messiah came to offer, they didn't want to listen to what message he had to offer. They wanted their own plan to come to fruition. And when that didn't happen, what did they say? Away with him. This is not what we were hoping for. This is not the promise that we were waiting to see fulfilled. We do not want him. My friends, sometimes when we are praying for something, we are yearning for something, we are hoping for something, and it doesn't happen the way that we want it to happen, do we do the same? When will we as the church, as the body of believers, learn to place our hope not in our dreams, not in our expectations, but in what God has in place for you and for me? Again and again we go back to that passage of Jeremiah 29 where God says, I have the plans for you. I have made the plans for you, and I will fulfill them. The question is, are we ready to accept what God's plan is? Or are we so eager to establish our own plans in our own way that we will not even listen to the words of Jesus the Messiah? A caution as we journey through this Advent season. We are coming to the end of it. And we considered the theme of peace, and of course Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and again we define what that peace is like. We want to have trouble-free life. We don't want any disturbances in our peace. We want smooth sailing of life. We do not want any troubled water. We do not want any wind blowing against us. We want everything to be very pleasant. And when that doesn't happen, again, we cry out and say, God, what is going on? Why don't we have peace in our lives? I remember that little story of how the disciples were trying to cross the Sea of Galilee. You remember that story? While they were on the boat, while they were crossing the sea, going on to the other side, what happened? There arose a storm. It says that storm came suddenly. How often in our lives storms come up so suddenly that you don't even know what hit you. How quickly those winds blow that you and I are not prepared adequately to deal with what life throws at us from time to time. The disciples were stunned. They just didn't know what to do. They did their best as much as they could. And yet, when everything failed, guess what? They go and wake up the Lord. They should have probably done that the first thing. Is that the same with us? We try to handle our own problems. We try to take care of things. We try to, patches here and there so that, our lives have some semblance of balance and peace. What does Jesus say when they wake him up? Lord, don't you care? Don't you care that we perish? We're about to die. And so they wake him up. What does he do when he wakes up? He says to the wind and the storm, peace, be still. And then he turns to them and says, why are you so afraid, ye of little faith? Where is your sense of balance, of peace in your life right now? If you were to take a graph and put a straight line and say that is the line of peace in your life, and you want to rate that sense of peace in you, where would you put your number on that line? Would it be at 10? Would it be at 5? Or would it be at a 1? You're so deeply troubled. There is no peace at all in your life. There is no rest. There is no sleep coming. Jesus was asleep in a boat that was about to go under. Why? Because he knew the end. He knew that storm will have absolutely no effect, zero effect on the lives of the disciples and himself. Friends, many times I think we try to alter God's plans because we think we know better. This morning I was having a conversation with a member of my church who was leaving, and we were just doing some little chit-chat, and she said, you know what my problem is, Pastor? I said, tell me, John, what is your problem? She said, I try to remove God from all the planning in my life. I try to make my own plans because sometimes I just don't get God's plan. I'm so impatient with God's plan that I just don't want to do that. And I said, don't we all try to do that, John? You're not alone. We all try to do that. We all try to think that we have the better plan than God's plan. We can run our lives far better than how God can. So we don't let God. And then we get into all kinds of mess. Well, then came the third Sunday of Advent. We all know that. It came on the heels of what happened in Connecticut. You remember that? Our nation will never forget what happened in Newtown. Hardly 10 days ago? A whole community was thrown into such tremendous pain. And that Sunday we came together. Even as you did, I did, and I stood in the pulpit, and my theme was joy. What do you say to a family that lost a 6-year-old to a senseless, violent killing? What do you say to a community that lost 20 children in one incident and 6 teachers? What do you say? How do you even begin to comfort and to console? There are really no words to speak to that situation because of the depth of the grief. Several people in my congregation emailed me and said, Pastor, we are at our wits' end to understand why this has happened and what we ought to do, and we don't even know what to say to our children. Would you please not say anything from the pulpit so that our children won't hear what happened in Connecticut, because we don't know what to say. So in my prayer time, not in my sermon time, but in my prayer time, I made reference to the brokenness that we live in. This chaotic world that we live in. This senseless, meaningless strife that we live in from day to day. I simply offered prayer for peace in the lives of these families that were shattered by what happened. No words will ever comfort. No words will ever bring back the lives of the children that have been lost. And sometimes it is hard to experience that sense of joy that the Bible talks about, that Jesus talks about. And yet, we need to hold the two in balance. We need to hold the reality of the pain, the reality of the brokenness that we live in, and the reality of the promise that Christ has come to offer. And the joy that he has come to offer, that he refers to as joy in abundance, not just joy, but joy in abundance is not something that is dependent on whether things are going fine in our lives or not, but that is the sense of joy in knowing that he is with us. He is with us. Isn't that the message of Christmas? Isn't his name Emmanuel? And doesn't that mean that God is with us? So when a father called me and said, where was God when these children were being massacred? Where is God now when there is so much of pain in that community, and so many tears are being shed? The only answer I could give to this father, this young father who has a 6-year-old, who's still having a hard time, by the way. I said, God, my dear brother, is weeping with those families right now. This is not God's plan. God doesn't plan the violence. But God does offer comfort and hope in and through you and me. as strange as it may seem, God has a way of using you and me to those who are suffering. So I said to him, and I say to you this evening, that we are a people who live in between two Advents. I think you've heard that before. We're not just a people who look back and remember what happened the first Advent and all these themes that we talk about, but we are also a people of hope for what is to come. He who came as a baby in that unknown village, Bethlehem, is coming again. And sometimes we lose sight of that and we get caught up in the rush of life, and we forget that we are not meant to be in this world forever and ever. Our destiny is beyond the scope of this life. What is to be is a mystery, says Paul. We do not know yet exactly what that is going to be like. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him. And make no mistake, he is coming again. And so in that hope of his coming again, we draw strength, we draw that sense of peace, we draw that sense of okay and wellness. Yes, in the midst of our suffering and pain, we remember that God is Emmanuel, God is with us, and therefore we draw our strength, that sense of joy from knowing that God is present with us. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And finally, today we come to the fourth Sunday. Today's theme is love. And love, I think, is a kind of a universal concept. I think love is something that everybody dreams, everybody hopes, everybody wants, everybody desires. But we all have different views of love. We all have different understanding of this term love. But this evening, very briefly, I want us to consider what love is from the perspective of what the Bible has to say. Of course, I quoted already to you John 3:16, which is sort of the quintessential verse on love in the Bible. But same author, the Apostle John, writing in his first letter, in chapter 4, he writes this: "This is how God has shown his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we may live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins." The only way love is expressed and understood is through sacrifice. You may write poems, you may write songs, you may write books, you may write whatever words you may use to convey love, but if there is no sacrifice in it, that love is shallow. That's why time and again in the epistle, John says, do not say in words only. You have to show your love to each other. Therefore, he says, dear friends, let us love one another, because love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. And whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Let us not be shaped by what the world wants us to believe and live by. Let us be shaped by what the Spirit of God has to say to us about what true love is. True love is to truly sacrifice. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for others. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in him. And in this way, love is made complete among us, so that we have confidence in the day of judgment. We love because he first loved us. If anyone says, I love God and yet hates his brother, he is a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And he has given us this commandment: whoever loves God must love his brother. We have work to do. May God bless you during the rest of this Advent season. A couple of days left. And as we come back together on the great day, Christmas Day, and we greet each other Merry Christmas or Happy Christmas, let us ask ourselves the question: have we really placed our hope in God? Have we really experienced that inner sense of peace in our lives? Have we the joy that Jesus promised? Do we love each other as we claim we love God? May God add his blessing to his precious word.